Michael Bailey was humiliated and mocked in a building where he was supposed to reform the system. What they didn't know was that they were standing before the Attorney General. What happened next shocked even the most cynical onlookers. But let's start from the beginning. Injustice and bias. Michael Bailey, a 30-year-old African-American with an outstanding legal education, carefully chose his tie in front of a cracked mirror in a cheap motel room that morning. His old suit looked a bit worn, but he reminded himself that it wasn't about the clothes. It was about what he stood for. Today marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life as the state's Attorney General. It was his first visit to a local police department, a symbolic step toward building dialogue with law enforcement. He stepped outside and raised his hand, trying to hail a cab. Several cars passed him by without even slowing down. One driver, after glancing at his old suit, simply turned his head away. Staying composed, Michael decided to walk to the police department, even though it took longer than he had planned. At the building's entrance, two white officers were chatting animatedly. They stopped mid-conversation and stared as Michael approached. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a mocking smile, spoke up. "Hey, buddy, you sure you're in the right place? We don't take in homeless people here." Michael, trying to hide his irritation, replied calmly, "I'm here on official business. I have a meeting with the chief of police." The other officer, short and stocky, laughed. "With the chief? In that?" he said, gesturing at Michael's suit. "At least try a thrift store next time. Are we hiring today, or are you here to mop the floors?" Michael took a deep breath, suppressing his anger. "Here's my ID," he said steadily, pulling out a document from his inner pocket that confirmed his position. The officers took the ID, but barely glanced at it. "Attorney General?" the tall officer drawled sarcastically. "Who are you trying to fool? This is a fake for sure. Where'd you get it? On the corner?" Michael tried again to explain. "It's a legitimate ID. I have an appointment, and I cannot afford to be late." Instead of listening, the officers exchanged a glance and burst out laughing. "Oh, he even talks like a lawyer," the shorter officer shouted, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "Let's run him through the system. Maybe he's wanted." Michael was led inside and seated on a plastic chair in the lobby. One officer went to call the security chief, while the other stayed behind, tossing out the occasional mocking comment. "This is just a joke. Who even shows up to meet the chief dressed like that? Are your shoes at least holding up?" Other staff members began noticing the situation. Some looked at Michael with curiosity, but no one intervened. A passing office worker muttered under her breath, "Another one who parked where they shouldn't have. How many times do we have to deal with this nonsense?" Michael sat still, his fingers clenched into a fist. He knew that any sign of frustration would only make things worse. He reminded himself that these were the kinds of situations he'd have to face repeatedly if he wanted to bring about change. Meanwhile, a young intern working at the reception desk watched the scene unfold from a distance. The intern, who had only recently joined the department, was already aware of how often bias influenced decisions. He observed Michael maintaining his composure despite the insults. Quietly, he took out his phone and began recording. When the officer returned to his partner, they continued loudly mocking Michael's ridiculous appearance. "If this guy's an attorney general, then I'm the president," the tall one chuckled. "Yeah, he's definitely a scammer. What kind of attorney general would show up looking like that?" By now, Michael could feel the piercing gazes of everyone around him. He realized that the incident was escalating, but remained silent, knowing that the truth would inevitably come to light. Michael continued to sit on the plastic chair in the lobby, feeling the weight of the stares directed at him. Everyone passing by cast either curious or disdainful glances. The officers standing nearby began to escalate their mockery. "Hey, maybe you're here to meet the governor next," one officer sneered, slapping his thigh in amusement. "Or maybe the president?" the other chimed in. "Though even the president would be embarrassed by that suit." Michael clenched his fists around the edge of his briefcase, struggling to maintain composure. He knew he had to remain calm. Giving them a reason to escalate further could be disastrous. At that moment, The security chief entered the lobby, a middle-aged man with a sharp gaze. "What's going on here?" he demanded, addressing the officers. "This guy," one officer said, gesturing at Michael, "claims he's the Attorney General. Just take a look at his ID. Total fake." The security chief grabbed the ID, gave it a cursory glance, and then looked Michael up and down. Like the officers, he smirked. "Seriously? You expect us to believe this? Attorneys General don't show up looking like that." He tossed the ID onto the table in front of Michael. Michael rose from his chair, still trying to keep his composure. "You can call the governor's office. They'll confirm that I'm the Attorney General," he said with quiet confidence. "Oh, is that so?" The security chief leaned in closer, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Then why didn't you wear something more respectable for such an important meeting? Or is this your official work suit?" Nearby, the young intern who had been observing the scene clenched his fists. He couldn't stay silent any longer. Taking a step forward, he quietly addressed the security chief. "Sir, maybe it would be worth verifying his claims before jumping to conclusions." The officers turned to the intern with scornful expressions. "You're too green, kid. Stick to your job," one of them snapped. But the intern wasn't deterred. He stepped out from behind the desk and approached Michael. "Sir, if you truly are the Attorney General, perhaps I can call someone from senior leadership to clarify?" he asked, ignoring the disapproving glares of his colleagues. Michael nodded, taking note of the young officer's courage. "I'd appreciate that." While the intern headed to find the police chief, the atmosphere in the lobby grew more tense. The officers resumed their mocking remarks, now even louder. One suggested, "Maybe we should call in a squad car and haul him in for questioning. Who knows, maybe he's got a record." Meanwhile, the video the intern had discreetly recorded was already making its way to his personal social media account. He wasn't sure if it would make a difference, but he hoped the truth would come to light. A few minutes later, the police chief, Captain Larry Wilkins, entered the lobby. A tall man with gray hair and a stern demeanor, he immediately noticed the tension in the room. "What's going on here?" he asked loudly. The officers froze as though caught red-handed. "This man," one officer began, pointing at Michael, "claims to be the Attorney General, but his documents, well, they seem suspicious." The captain turned his gaze to Michael, who stepped forward calmly and handed over his ID. "I'm Michael Bailey, the Attorney General of this state. I had an appointment with you, Captain Wilkins." The captain carefully examined the ID and then looked back at Michael. A flicker of embarrassment crossed his face. He realized a serious mistake had been made, but the eyes of the entire department were now on him. "Come with me to my office, Mr. Bailey," he said curtly, gesturing toward the door. "I won't sugarcoat this," he began, scanning the room. "What happened yesterday is a disgrace to this department. Everyone involved will face consequences, no exceptions." Some officers tried to defend themselves. "But it was just a misunderstanding. He looked like—" "Silence!" the captain interrupted sharply. "Your behavior has shown the world just how far we are from upholding our duties. We are here to protect, not to humiliate." Meanwhile, in Michael's office, preparations were underway for a meeting with the governor and community leaders. His team was compiling proposals for reforms, including mandatory bias training, independent reviews of complaints against police, and public accountability measures for law enforcement. Michael understood that exposure alone wasn't enough. He convened a gathering of community representatives, activists, and officials at City Hall to discuss actionable steps. His speech became the meeting's defining moment. "We must work together to build a system that doesn't judge people by their appearance or background. We cannot allow personal biases to erode trust between the public and the justice system." Back at the police department, another drama was unfolding. The young intern, now hailed as a social media hero, faced backlash from some colleagues. Summoned to Captain Wilkins' office, he braced himself for reprimand. Instead, the captain surprised him. "You did the right thing. We need people like you to help lead change. If you're willing, I'd like to assign you to a new ethics oversight team," Wilkins said. The intern was stunned but nodded, recognizing this as an opportunity to make a meaningful difference. That evening, Michael once again stood at the doors of the police department, but this time he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by journalists and activists. Captain Wilkins met them at the entrance. "We've completed the first phase of our internal investigation," Wilkins announced. "The 2 officers who mocked you yesterday have been temporarily suspended, but we understand this is only the beginning." Michael looked at the assembled officers and staff. "I believe every person has the capacity to change," he said, his voice calm yet resolute. "And I hope this department will become a model for others." His words carried both a challenge and a vision for the future. In the months that followed, the police department began to transform. Captain Wilkins' ensured commitments were upheld, and the young intern took charge of a new program focused on transparency and accountability. The video that had set everything in motion became a symbol of the fight for justice. At a public gathering, Michael addressed a packed crowd. "Every time we witness injustice, we have a choice: to stay silent or to act. Thank you to everyone who chose to act. Today, we've proven that change is possible." The room erupted in applause. Michael knew there was still much work to be done, but this day stood as proof that one story could spark a movement and begin to reshape the system. As Captain Wilkins led Michael into his office, the officers left behind exchanged uneasy glances. Some appeared embarrassed, but most continued whispering about the ridiculous situation. Behind closed doors, the captain turned to Michael. "First, let me apologize for the misunderstanding," he began, but Michael raised a hand to stop him. "A misunderstanding?" Michael's voice was calm but firm. "I sat in your lobby for over an hour being subjected to humiliation because your officers decided that my appearance determines my worth. This isn't a misunderstanding, Captain. It's a systemic issue." Captain Wilkins took a step back, his face flushing. He tried to interject, but Michael continued. "This is unacceptable, and you know it. I didn't come here today to face discrimination. I came to talk about reforms. Now I see that those reforms need to start right here." Meanwhile, in the lobby, another scene was unfolding. The intern, still at his desk, watched as the video he had posted online began to gain traction. Comments condemning the officer's behavior started pouring in. "What are you doing?" one of the officers asked, noticing the intern glued to his phone. "Do you really think anyone cares about this nonsense?" "I think people deserve to know," the intern replied, meeting the officer's glare. "This kind of behavior is unacceptable." The conversation was interrupted when Michael and Captain Wilkins emerged from the office. The captain looked tense, but composed. Michael scanned the room calmly before addressing everyone present. "Thank you for the lesson," he said, his voice clear and steady. "Today, you've shown me exactly why law enforcement reforms are necessary. Your job is to protect people, not judge them by their appearance." Some staff members averted their eyes, while others stood silently, clearly uncomfortable. The officer who had mocked Michael the most couldn't resist speaking up. "What, you're going to put on a show now? Think this'll change anything?" Michael turned to face him directly. "I'm not here to put on a show. I'm here to show that everyone deserves respect, even those who haven't learned that yet," he said, meeting the officer's gaze unwaveringly. Captain Wilkins stepped in, trying to defuse the situation. "That's enough. We all need to take this as a learning moment. I'll personally ensure this never happens again." But Michael wasn't ready to leave it at that. "No, Captain," he said firmly. "You won't just ensure it. This will be part of an official investigation. I'll start with you. If you can't control your team, that's on you." At that moment, reporters entered the lobby. The intern's video had gone viral, drawing media attention. Michael didn't shy away from their questions. Instead, he addressed the cameras directly. "This is what thousands of people face every day. We need to expose these incidents and fight for justice." The officers around him began to realize the gravity of the situation. A formal investigation was inevitable, and their careers now hung in the balance. Among the crowd, the intern stood quietly, feeling a newfound pride in his actions. When the journalist left, he approached Michael. "Thank you for what you're doing, sir," he said softly. Michael nodded, replying, "Thank you for having the courage to speak up when others stayed silent. People like you can change this system." Captain Wilkins escorted Michael to the door. As they parted, the captain said, "I'll make sure nothing like this happens again." Michael turned back with a steady gaze. "Show me through action, Captain," he said, stepping outside to the flash of cameras.